When the US Army arrived in the UK as part of Operation Bolero, it was decided for various reasons not to have a unified command structure. Therefore the US Army was designated the ports to the west with the ports to the east British. The exception was Southampton, that was to be shared by both forces. Slapton sans the rehearsal for D-Day was a tragic lesson which taught the Allies that if the landings were to be a success, the Armada would need close and continuous control. Although the decision to go was given at Southwick House north of Portsdown Hill, which therefore claims to be the home of D-Day, afterwards command was delegated to each of the task forces that were to act independently. The headquarters for Force S for Sword Beach was in Montgomery Way in Portsmouth. The headquarters for the Canadians Force J Juno Beach in the Royal Yacht Club on the Isle of Wight. Force G for Gold Beach was the Southwestern Hotel in Southampton. The idea that the US Army was under the control of Southwick Park is preposterous. The headquarters for the US Army not only for Southampton but all the American ports in the UK on the south coast was in the Art Gallery rooms in the Civic Centre. This extract from Lieutenant Colonel George Dyer's book on Patton's Third Army explains some of the logistical challenges faced by the Americans working in the Civic Centre on Operation Neptune. Of course, when we moved to Bremer, says the Corps Company Sergeant, our only job was to get the 12th Corps and the Third Army to France. About 1/4 of Army had gone to France when we got down there. Major General John S. Wood was moving to France on the day I got down there. A shipping schedule had been worked out, but this broke down due to some units being lost, others not arriving on time, or because of the inability to obtain proper equipment. Part of the company sergeant's job was that of making an educated guess as to just when a unit would be ready, and then assigning to it a shipping date. This schedule then had to be worked out with BUCO, the build-up and control organization, who ordered the shipping. To add to the confusion, phantom telephone calls would be received from Army requesting that certain units be immediately shipped. Sometimes these units were not ready or had not even arrived. The connections were always bad and guesses had to be made as to just what unit and strength were required. At other times units would be ready ahead of schedule and the Navy had to be persuaded to take them as soon as possible, the joint aim being to keep the boats running continuously. 12th Corps, acting for Army, practically took over Cheltenham's services of supply headquarters and ran it, but it required running the wheels off the jeeps to keep it going. What this meant in the 12th Comp Staff sections has been excellently summarized by Major William B. Shop Shepherd, a friendly capable artillery officer out of Princeton, Fort Sill and Leavenworth. I was working in G3 troop movements, the hot seat for this operation, if ever there was one. We were responsible for moving all our corps, most of 3rd Army and 20 Corps, across the Channel. I never worked so hard in my life. The system for moving troops to the far shore was based on previously established priority tables, called build-up priority tables. There was BUCO Build-Up Control Organization at Southampton and Little BUCO on the continent. Little BUCO informed BUCO what troops to move. BUCO then sent movement orders to the Transportation Corps I Embarco, and to us. Embarco was actually supposed to move the units to the marshalling area. If that system had worked, the job would have been simple, but unfortunately many units were not equipped when they received movement orders. So they would be bypassed. That is where the complication started and did not end until we developed a closely coordinated system using all the special staff sections concerned, plus very close cooperation between G3 and G4. It was necessary to maintain daily lists of units that were ready to ship. These were sent to BUCO and I supposed further sent to Little BUCO. Then Little BUCO called only for units that our GIFA had certified as being ready for movement. Our job was mostly a bookkeeping one, maintaining daily long status lists of what units were ready, which ones were short critical items of equipment, which were alerted for movement to the marshalling area, and which had actually landed on the far shore. In his report, Admiral Ramsey says, "It was found necessary during planning to set up new organizations to control various aspects of the operation during the vital first few weeks in which the tempo of the initial assaults had to be maintained at the highest pitch. TURCO, Turn Round Control Organization, BUCO, Build-Up Control Organization, CORUP, Control Repair Organization, and COTUG, Control Tug Organization accordingly came into being and were instrumental in the success achieved. The Americans left a plaque above the doorway to the art gallery rooms too high to read before it was relocated that says, presented by the 14th Major Port US Army in acknowledgement of the generosity of the Borough of Southampton, which during the mayoralty of Rex Stranger MC gratuitously provided the section of the Civic Centre for use as headquarters for the port. It was from here that orders emanated directing the movement of the vast American armies through Southampton and other South Coast ports between June 1944 and the end of hostilities in the Great War for the liberation of Europe. Unfortunately, the plaque is often misinterpreted. Although it states the rooms were used as headquarters for the port, it also says, it was from here that orders emanated directing the movement of the vast American armies through Southampton and other South Coast ports between June 1944 and the end of hostilities in the Great War for the liberation of Europe. In other words, it was not only the headquarters for the port of Southampton but the entire US Army on the south coast of England. Staff Sergeant Erwin Swerdlow puts it like this in an article for the U.S. Army Transportation Journal Volume 1, Number 9, October, 1945, pages 23 to 25. Early in May, a month before D-Day, Southampton and its litter of subports became the focus in the preparation for the great outbound movement to the continent. These subports, operated by the 14th Port with headquarters at Southampton, included Portland, Weymouth, Truro, Plymouth, Falmouth, Dartmouth, Hale, Totnes, Hamble, and Poole. To make the significance of the headquarters clear, outside the entrance where a GI sentry once stood there is another plaque which reads, "This tablet records that a wing of the Civic Centre was used as headquarters by the 14th Major Port US Army during World War II. Between D-Day, June 6 and the end of hostilities, orders were issued from here directing the embarkation of American armies who together with their allies sailed from Southampton docks to liberate Europe. During the operation, over 2,250,000 troops, 250,000 vehicles and millions of tons of supplies of the US Army were shipped through this port. Without the Americans there could be no second front, and however improbable it may seem, according to these plaques the greatest military operation in world history was launched from the Art Gallery rooms in Southampton. However, because Portsmouth has the D-Day Museum, it has held the hoodoo over Southampton, but during World War II the Royal Navy left Portsmouth for Scapa Flow in Scotland for security reasons. There were no capital ships at Portsmouth. Southampton embarked almost twice as many troops on D-Day, and by October marshalling Area D around Portsmouth finished operating and was amalgamated with Area C at Southampton, which carried on resupplying the continent until the end of hostilities. It is estimated that as well as over 2 million US Army troops, over 1 million British and Commonwealth troops embarked from the port during World War II. Another confusion generated by AI, artificial intelligence, is that the port of Southampton was controlled by the US Army. This is a logical assumption given that the plaques are signed by the US Army or port commander. However, this term refers to the rank of the officer in the US Army and has nothing whatsoever to do with control of the port. Throughout the war the port of Southampton was owned and managed by the British Railway Company, Southern Railway. It is ridiculous to suggest that the port was run by the US Army when 2/3 of the British Army embarked from the port on D-Day. It is now generally believed that the special relationships between Allies was a media invention, but in order to make D-Day a success the Allies had to work together. So for example, as described in Lieutenant Colonel George Dyer's book, initially the US Army had problems and at one stage the commanding officer shared US landing craft with the British Army which they could not fill because of a logistical problem. The US plaque also refers to the Mayor Rex Stranger, gratuitously providing the section of the Civic Centre as headquarters. This word is inserted as an in-joke between Allies because, as the records in the Southampton City Archive show, there was a discussion at the time as to whether the Americans should pay rent for the rooms. During the war the docks were operated by a committee which met regularly, and in recognition of the magnificent teamwork between Allies the US Army commanding officer and deputy were awarded an OBE and CBE, and the 14th Major Port were given the freedom of Southampton. Yet in the 80-year commemoration of D-Day the Americans were completely ignored, and links provided with the US Embassy and the Eisenhower Presidential Library in the United States treated with disdain. The chief reporter for the Guardian newspaper, Daniel Boffey, investigated the reason there is no significant memorial to D-Day in Southampton. Despite a Daily Echo front-page article a few weeks earlier, Save the Whale, campaigners call to honor D-Day heroes, he was told by the official historian this was because people were ready to move on.